What happened to Luke on May 23, 2022, was beyond terrifying. He had lost everything in his life to gambling and betting, leaving him with a massive debt. With no other options, he had to take on a night job as a security guard at a private company. That night, around 2:30 a.m., Luke was sitting in the security room with his co-worker, Tony. Luke was so exhausted from weeks of sleepless nights that as soon as Tony decided to patrol the area, Luke tried to take a short nap. But a mysterious call from his 10-year-old daughter, Alba, jolted him awake. "Someone's in the house," Alba said, crying and terrified. Without hesitation, Luke jumped into his car and sped home that was about 20 kilometers away from his work. There was a reason to why he was afraid. One of his creditors had repeatedly threatened him and his family with death. Luke drove as fast as he could, but when he arrived, it was already too late. As soon as he entered the house, he noticed something was off. The power was out, and all the windows were open. The curtains were swaying in the wind, and the house was a mess. Drops of blood scattered on the floor and walls hinted at something terrible. Panic-stricken, he called out for Alba and his wife Laura, but got no response. He turned on the flashlight on his phone and grabbed the baseball bat hanging on the wall. He headed toward the bedrooms. The first bedroom was empty, no sign of Alba or her mother. But Luke's eyes were drawn to a trail of blood that led out of the room, as if someone had dragged a body on the ground. He followed it to Alba's room at the end of the hallway. Luke shined his light around the room, and soon the beam stopped on something that made his heart skip a beat. Blood was dripping onto the floor from a spot above Alba's closet, where her dolls were kept. Luke aimed his light at the dolls on top of the closet. His hand shook with anxiety. Then he froze in horror. Among the dolls was something that wasn't a doll at all. It was a human head, with long curly hair covering the face, blood dripping from it. Only one eye was still open, and though most of the face was obscured, Luke knew exactly what he was looking at: the severed head of his wife. But the real terror struck when Luke realized he wasn't alone in the room. As he called for his daughter, he noticed something behind the curtain. The window was open, and the curtain was gently swaying. With each movement, the bulky shadow of a person became visible behind it. Someone Luke was sure wasn't Alba. Driven mad with fear, Luke dropped his phone and charged at the figure behind the curtain. A few blows to the head and face were enough to bring the intruder down, but Luke didn't stop. He kept striking the man with the bat over and over. When he was sure the man was dead, Luke began searching for his daughter. But then, the sound of his phone ringing caught his attention. It took him a moment to find the phone, which he had thrown to the ground. But when he saw Tony's name on the screen, he froze. Luke stood in the middle of his living room, confused and shocked, not just because all the lights were on and everything seemed normal, but because he had no idea why he was there or why he had come home. He had no answer until he answered the call. What Tony told him was unbelievable. Tony was surprised that Luke had suddenly left work without saying anything. The only thing Luke could remember was the vague image of his daughter's call. But when he checked his call history, there was no call from Alba or his wife. Staring at the phone in disbelief, Luke noticed blood trickling from his hand onto the screen. He quickly dropped the phone and looked at his bloody hands. His horror deepened when he realized the blood wasn't his. Just then, Alba's scream snapped him back to reality. He rushed to the bedroom. Alba was sitting on the floor, crying over her mother's lifeless body, which had been brutally beaten with the baseball bat. Luke slowly began to understand what had happened. Tony had last seen Luke sleeping in the security room at work, and that's what Luke remembered too. Everything that started with Alba's call and the events that followed had been just a dream. Luke and his family had a history of sleepwalking, and despite Luke's recovery, the stress and lack of sleep in recent months had triggered a sleepwalking episode that night. Laura, surprised by Luke's sudden return home, had tried to wake him, but instead he attacked and killed her. "I killed my wife." That was the only thing Luke could say at the police station after turning himself in. In court, Luke remembered nothing from that night except the blurry images of Alba's call and the shadow behind the curtain. Even though the court ultimately ruled Luke innocent due to his sleepwalking and lack of motive, the horror of that night never left him, the fear of what crime he might commit each time he falls asleep.